Markers and annotations are an incredibly useful feature of the Data Logger module in XploriLab. To use them, make sure you are in line graph view mode and that you have an experiment open. Then, to add markers to your scene, look for the icon that looks like a flag and click on it. When you do so, you can now select multiple data points on your graph and get the collected data as well as either the timestamp or sample number for that piece of data. Now, if you would like to add more than 2, you'll notice clicking doesn't work. However, you can still add more than 2 markers, but you can only have 2 movable markers, indicated by this black dot on the bottom. Clicking on that black dot will allow you to move it between your data points. Now, to add additional markers, you need to lock the ones you have so that you can still maintain only 2 movable markers. To lock any data points, simply click on the bubble above the marker, and when the dialog box pops up, select the lock icon. The little marker icon will switch to white, and now you can add additional markers as desired. Simply keep locking them to continue adding more data points. You can also add annotations to your graph. Annotations are the button that looks like a piece of paper, and when you click on it, you can select a point on your graph, and it will add an annotation to that location. Type in your note, add an image using the picture button, and click on the check mark to add it to your graph. If you would like to hide any given annotations, simply click on the annotation button to minimize it. You can add as many annotations as you have data points for your graph. In addition to still images like you see I'm adding here, you can also add animated GIFs, such as things you've created in the Animator module of XploriLab. Now switch your graph over to bar graph mode. You'll notice here that the annotations did not transfer over. Those live specifically on the graph they were added to. Now, markers was automatically selected this time, but it may not have been for you. Clicking on that button will toggle whether the markers are visible, and in bar graph mode it will show either 1 per data point or as many as will fit on the screen, whichever is more. To add an annotation to a bar graph, you'll notice the markers disappear while doing so. But you can add annotations first, and then add the markers back in afterwards. To add an annotation in bar graph mode, you need to click somewhere inside one of the bar graphs. If you click out in space, nothing will happen, but clicking inside the bar will allow you to add your annotation. Now, if you are working with a line graph that has multiple pieces of data that were collected at once, such as in this one of your graphs will be the primary or selected graph. You can see which one it is by looking at the y-axis. Now, any markers or annotations you add to this graph will be added to the selected sensor. If you would like to add markers or annotations to multiple of your graphs, you can do so by changing which graph is the primary graph. Now, if I were to do that right now with only 2 movable markers in my scene, these markers would jump from their current graph onto the newly selected one. If I want them to stay put on this specific graph, I need to make sure I lock them before switching which graph is my primary graph. To show that, I will add a movable graph over here, and you'll see that it jumps down to the other graph when I select that sensor. So to change which sensor is the primary one, go into the Graph Settings button in the bottom left corner and simply click on whichever sensor you would like to be your primary graph. When you close out of this window, you'll notice this marker here moved onto the sound graph, whereas the 2 that were attached and locked to the light graph stayed in place. I can now go and add additional sensor, markers, annotations, and so forth, so that I have them on both types of graphs. So there you have it, a basic introduction to how you would use both markers and annotations in line and bar graph mode in the Data Logger module. Thanks so much for watching. Have a wonderful day.